Angela, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So, you are a psychedelic therapist working for the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness in Colorado. My first question is, how does it feel to be working in a field that's on the cutting edge of psychology and, quite frankly, legality? Does it feel like a pioneering journey?
It does. I feel incredibly grateful to be here now. The journey to getting here, this wasn't a space that I always thought was possible for me. So the fact that I'm here working in it feels very exciting and very cutting edge. And I'm working with only legal medicine. So right now I'm feeling very solid in that's the substances I get to work with. Um, I feel like for all those individuals that are working in the underground space, that definitely has a place. But I feel like for myself, I would be too nervous there. So I'm grateful that I can work in this, in the legal spaces and still be able to support people and with this really, really important work.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the methodology that goes into, because you guys work with cannabis and ketamine. A lot of that methodology can be translated directly to a lot of the other psychedelic medicines out there. Our listeners will likely be familiar with psychedelic use in a therapeutic setting, especially if they did listen to my interview with Daniel McQueen, who was the founder of medicinal mindfulness. But for anyone who's not, how do psychedelic states empower the individual to work through important issues?
I feel like what's really important about the psychedelic state is that it allows us to kind of get out of the head in a really important way and often into body or into experiences that we can't just think our way out of. We can't think ourselves out of a thinking problem. And oftentimes that's what we end up doing or trying to do time and time again. um, Working as a therapist, I've always loved being there with people and helping them kind of sort things out and supporting them on their journey. But in the psychedelic space, they have all the knowledge. It's there. And the psychedelic space allows us to unlock it and get in touch with really, I feel like, a deeper, truer version of ourselves that these medicines can often really open us up to.
So, what kind of training did you have in order to get into this field?
So I have a background in psychotherapy. I got a degree in psychology that I earned in Canada, which is where I was born and raised. And when I finished that, I decided I really wanted to have an adventure. So I moved to Ireland, which I adored, and I just fell in love with the place and the people. And my plan was to go for 1 year, but I just was in love with it, so I stayed for, like, 12 in total. Very grateful that I was able to have that opportunity, and there I continued my education, and I got a graduate diploma in counseling and psychotherapy, and there I ran, like, courses and workshops and groups, and really I was helping people just get in touch with themselves and find a little bit of compassion, and decided to have another adventure after living for years in Ireland and moved to sunny Colorado. And when I was here, I was actually working within the judicial system, so I couldn't step in to this psychedelic space, but I've always been so drawn to it and so pulled to do this work. And I was able to start training, and I was further really given the example of what these medicines can do. And it allowed, after I did that training, I was able to start working with medicinal mindfulness. But I feel like it's been like all of these small steps that have really helped lead to being able to step fully into this field. And that was just like my education through schooling. But I was also a psychonaut myself and was often helping people on nights out, whether I wanted to or not. I would see someone struggling and I would really just go over and be like, "Do you need anything? Can I get you some water?" I would always carry around like lollipops and chewing gums for like I'd be at certain activities or different like electrolytes. And whether I was imbibing or anything, it didn't matter. I could see someone struggling, was like, "Can I get you anything?" And it's just like a part of me that's always wanted to support people in these states. And so I feel like it's like all of these things combined that just made me feel like, I'm really get to, I feel in, very myself in these spaces.
So your adventures as a psychonaut sort of inspired you to fit your way into this field.
I feel like those types of adventures just made me feel so comfortable in that space and recognizing that not everyone feels like that. Not everyone can do those inner journeys. Um, and still be able to feel kind of solid in self. And I would see other people struggle. And it's not that I didn't have difficult experiences with them, but I seem to be able to really trust the medicines and feel like, okay, there's something here. And I feel like that kind of led to the belief that I can also support other people there. If I can really believe that these medicines are healing, they'll be able to believe that as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing about these medicines is that, especially when you have the experience, you realize that what makes them so special is that they really, really work. I mean, more so than anything else I've ever seen, modality or
Mm.
substance wise. So I read that you have some training in art therapy. Do you implement that into your sessions at all?
I do sometimes. I'll usually if I do, it's usually in, like, integration sessions or often because the medicine work can be really abstract, especially, like, for a lot of people, the ketamine experience can be really, really abstract, and it's often maybe more of a feeling or it's not always as vivid, so some people are like, "I feel like there was something here and I don't know," so I'll just get out some art supplies and be like, "Well, let's just draw the feeling." And it can be a real struggle. I feel like, myself included, when it comes to doing anything artistic, I might have it in my head like it's supposed to look like this, when really it's about, no, what does it feel like? And can we connect to that feeling? And that can really help with integration for really on any medicine. It's like, it felt like this. It didn't look like this. It's like, it doesn't have to look like that. If you can just connect to what the feeling was, it can help make those things that are incomprehensible a little easier to understand.
Yeah, I like that concept. Like creating art in like with the essence of the feeling, not necessarily recreating an image that you've seen or some sort of a vision that you experienced. I think that's a good concept.
Yeah, and I am not always great at practicing it myself because 'cause I'll have in my head, "It should look like this," and it we have to park those shoulds sometimes, and if we can, connect back to the feeling, it can also just, in general, help with integrating these types of experiences, instead of, "This is what it meant, and this is what it is," it's like, "Okay, maybe, and that would be wonderful," but sometimes we don't have that type of understanding, so it's like, let's just go back to what really held meaning in the experience. And I feel like that's kind of the meat of it.
Mhm. I want to talk a little bit about Ireland because that's a really interesting story. So, what were
Mm,
some of the differences between like what you experience here and what you experience in Ireland, both socially, culturally, and also within like the field of psychology and psychiatry?
So I adored it. I felt and still do feel it's another home for me. I adored meeting the people and connecting with them, and I felt like you could kind of walk in anywhere and feel very welcome, and at that point in my life, I was also very much looking for community and looking to connect with people, and I felt it was really easy to do there, which was a lot of fun. I mean, I'd finished university and I was just kind of ready to have an adventure, and I got it. I got it there, and I got to meet just wonderful friends and wonderful people who we've now been through and grown so much together. And I found it really interesting because I didn't know this was the field I was going to step into when I first moved there. I was working in retail and just like, oh, I'm going to spend a year and I'm going to just play and have fun and go out all the time. But I had that itch of like, I wanna do more, and the training I did there, I felt was really, really great. There was a huge focus on personal development. So, like, in my first year of psychotherapy training, I had to be in, like, 50 hours of or something of my own personal therapy, and we had to continue that on every year because just the ethos was like, you can't be with someone in their space if you were thinking about your own experience. And so I felt like that was really, really beneficial because even in my undergrad, no one had talked about like, make sure you start therapy yourself so that you can support other people. It was like, okay, continue with your schooling, continue your education. And I felt like the world, like the life experience I got through that and the relationship with my own therapist had just been so healing and so helpful. When it comes to comparisons, I mean, there are so many differences and similarities, but I feel like I got to be there when there was a lot of really big changes. Like they had the marriage referendum, there was the repealing of the Eighth Amendment, which was about abortion rights, and there was just so much that happened that I was there, and it was really interesting with my friends and that they had grown up there, just them reflecting on like, wow, this is a very different place, and to be able to kind of be on the cusp of these really important changes just seemed great. And then to move here and it's like psilocybin, become legalized and things like that. It's like I love that I'm at these places where really big things are happening and I get to witness things that just feel very historic.
So is that what made you choose Colorado? Just like the laid back nature of their drug policy?
No, it was a bonus, but it was not the main thing. Because I mean, in Canada, like, a lot of those are becoming, a lot of those substances are legal as well. It was more wanderlust, like, my husband and I and our little boy, we were like, we wanted an adventure, and we had one of his, work colleagues would send us pictures of from being here, and we're like, "Wow, that place looks amazing." And so from the time we mentioned it to the time we arrived, it was like 4 months because we just had decided, like, "We're gonna do it, ready for an adventure." And I mean, the laid back drug policies have definitely been a bonus, and been able to step in this work in a very meaningful way that I don't think would have been as easy to do, most other places.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So going back to psychedelic therapy in general, what types of clients or what types of ailments do you guys generally see come into your clinic?
Yeah. I mean, so much. I feel like depression and anxiety are major things that I mean a huge amount of the population battle with. And often if they're coming to see us, it's because people are like, I either don't want to continue on the meds or I've decided I want to stop being on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. And they've searched what else can be of benefit, what else can help. And then there's also just so much trauma, like either clinically PTSD or just people who have experienced a lot. And for me, I just believe like trauma, it ends up it can often look like things that become normalized for the individual, but the outside world would then diagnose with diseases or disorders. But it's usually just a response of like, how can I be normal in this space when I feel so dysregulated? And so psychedelics can really help get back to that, to that regulation that maybe the individual, couldn't ever have because things happened when they were so young. So it can be, but like anxiety, depression, I've seen ADHD, yeah, lots of PTSD. I mean, most diagnoses we'll see. And then we also just work with people who are like, I want to see what these places are like. I want to go to these deep spaces and I just don't want to do it alone.
That is beautiful. The fact that you can also use these substances, like for, as Michael Pollan would say, the betterment of well people, not just if you
Mm.
have some sort of a psychological ailment. But you mentioned like people trying to uh, get away from the general medical prescription model. Are there medications that, or even diagnoses, that you recommend people stay away from psychedelics if they're still on?
There's still so much research going into that. And in general, we try to work with people that we know this will be of huge benefit for. And unfortunately, for a lot of personality disorders, these things just sometimes don't help. So they can't be of benefit. Certain like sociopathic tendencies, because what if someone has a really big realization, like they get in touch with this, this higher creation. They're like, I'm the higher creation. And that kind of just emphasizes those types of patterns. I recently had read something because originally ketamine they didn't recommend for bipolar disorder because it can sometimes heighten the manic tendencies. But there's some research recently happening trying to figure out like, is that true? Does it depend on the dosing? So I feel like because so much of this is cutting edge, there's just gonna be certain medicines that aren't gonna work, but it's also just to remember, like, psychedelics aren't for everyone. They're big, can be scary experiences, and I think it's why we have a lot of protocols because we wanna make sure that the people that are coming through can also have the inner resourcing to work with whatever comes up. And sometimes not everyone can, and that's okay. Maybe it's just a not now, and down the line, it's something that they could definitely work towards. But I feel like we got so many people who turned to us and or contacted us after the Michael Pollan documentary came out on Netflix. And they're like, I want to work with you, want to do this. And sometimes they weren't the people that it wasn't right for them. And as we would go through things like, oof, never mind. It's like, so fine. That's okay. And it's just important to remember, like some of us feel called to do this work and people can find their medicines and other people, it's just they try to climb Everest, and that's their medicine.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of I've heard Ram Dass talk about this, where he said his brother was institutionalized, and this
Mm.
was, I guess, before he went to India and became, a spiritual guru and all of this. So he came back to visit his brother, and he was dressed in all of his robes and all of this, and he walked into the institution, and he asked him his brother's name was Leonard, I believe, which is my last name, funny enough.
Mhm.
He said, "How you doing? Like, what's going on?" And he looked at Ram Dass and he said, "Look at you." He said, "I'm in here, and you're out walking around in the real world, and you're wearing a dress and a beard, and I have like a nice shirt on. Like, what's the difference here?" And Ram Dass
Mm.
says, "Well, the difference is that you think that you're Christ. I think that I'm Christ, but you think you're the only one who's Christ, and I know that we are all
Mm.
Christ." So I definitely see how you could get like that Messiah complex. Some of these
Yeah.
experiences really do make you feel like you're connecting with that higher power, and you could definitely misinterpret it as you being the only conduit of that higher power. So, how do you guys go about judging whether or not a person is suited to go through these types of sessions?
Well, we have full medical oversight from a doctor, and she helps, and then our clinic supervisor, and sometimes as a team, we have to discuss things as well just to see, if one of us is feeling like, can we work with this? Does this make sense? It's like sometimes as a community of practitioners, we just need to figure out the best way to support the individual because they come to us because they wanna do the work, and sometimes it's really difficult if there's something that we're like, "I don't know if this will work for them," and really having to reflect and decide, "Okay, can we do this? Can we do this safely, and will it be of benefit?" Because often, we can just get to a point where it's like we wanna try anything to feel better, and when that happens, it's like, as a practitioner, I don't wanna be the person who's like, "I can't help you," but sometimes it's about stepping back and be like, "But I know this isn't the best choice for them." And so it's really our clinical director and our medical director that would have the final say on that. But we do, as a practitioner, if I'm someone and I feel like I can work with this individual, it's going to be tough, but I'm willing to like be with them in that space, then that's also half the battle. And just like in a therapeutic space, we have to trust each other, which is really important as well. That's why having a guide in these spaces can be just healing in itself.
Yeah, can you talk about some of the benefits of having a guide as opposed to just journeying by yourself?
Yeah. The benefit and ideally a sober guy, because sometimes people like a bunch of friends are like, I'll be your buddy, but they're all doing psilocybin together. And it's like, okay, well, the buddies just wandered off to the woods, so we don't have that same support system. But it's just about, having someone, sometimes it's just about having someone witness you in the darkest spaces. It's just having someone there to share with whatever is coming up because these experiences aren't always positive. Often they're the most difficult, but maybe the most profound experiences someone will have. And they can feel very alone, or it's only you and the medicine. And so sometimes having someone to take note of that. I kind of am like a scribe throughout the session, like I'm taking notes the whole time. So a client will mention things, will mention insights, and then I will also draw them back to intention. So we discuss in advance words, phrases, things that they really would like to get out of it. So I get them to envision like, okay, the medicine sessions are done. You feel how? Like, what is this? What do you want at the end of this? What are the benefits you want? And then we pick out those words because we don't need to bring in the anxiety, depression. It's in their everyday life. That's not what needs to come in. It's more about getting centered on, the possibilities after. And so having that focus can be really helpful. But if someone doesn't have access to a guide, find like a very nice playlist, things like that, like things that can center you back to self or center you back to intention. It's like not everyone has the accessibility, and it's okay to take these journeys solo, but it's trying to have something that can center you back so that you don't get in a state of overwhelm is important.
Yeah. So what's the structure of the session? Like, what does it look like from ingestion to when it wears off?
So I guess it depends for which medicine. Like with the psychedelic cannabis, those can be longer and people can imbibe throughout. For the ketamine, we do IM, which would be needle injection, or there's also lozenges available. The IM ketamine experience is like a rocket ship, we describe it. It's like you start off very intensely, and then it will slowly kind of peter out back to coming back to self and body. But with that experience, it starts very intensely and people go to, like, usually space. They often feel like they're in space or floating in water. Um, and the intensity, but, like, there's that time dilation. So, clients sometimes will just report, like, "How long was I gone?" It's like, "That was 20 minutes." They're like, "There's no way that was 20 minutes." Even, like, having someone to, like, help make sense of, like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go again." It's like, yeah, just go off into where you need to explore. And with the cannabis experience, because depending on how much you can imbibe, usually the beginning same thing, like, it can be as intensely as you'd like it to be by just imbibing more or incorporating breath work. And then that will also just bring you to the edges of the universe and beyond.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked about this with Daniel a bit, but obviously, we're talking about psychedelic therapy and we're talking about psilocybin, but when you bring up cannabis, a lot of people get kind of weird about that. Like they don't think that
Yeah.
cannabis has the potential to put you in a powerful experience the same way that DMT or psilocybin does. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, this particular psychedelic cannabis blend has become one of my favorite psychedelics. And like it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly healing. And then yeah, like mixed with breath work. I became in a breathwork session, I became completely one with the universe. I was the universe, it was me, and it was like the most beautiful experience. And I felt like I healed all parts that my soul had ever existed on this planet, all of that. And it's like then I came back, I was like, "That was cannabis and breathwork?" Like, it is mind-blowing. Um, and I can understand I guess, the resistance to it because I think it's partly there's been a lot of propaganda about cannabis, and then it's also the assumption of like, well, it's not a real psychedelic. Like, if they were to even come to like one of the conscious cannabis circles that medicinal mindfulness has, they would again, the set and setting is important, but the blend is as well. And then I always will use the example of like you've heard the story of someone who had too many edibles and they had to go to the hospital because they thought they were having a heart attack. It's like they weren't, but they weren't in a safe space and they were having a very intense psychedelic experience because the cannabis experience is very, very, very somatic. So you feel it so much in your body, which can be so healing for trauma resolution and things like that. But I can understand, I guess, some resistance to it. It's very easy to resist something you haven't experienced, and I feel like that we can a lot of people would kinda be like, "Psilocybin's it, LSD's it," and it's like, maybe that's their medicine, and that's great that they found that, but for other people, the bonus of the cannabis experience is the agency. You can still feel like, you have some control of it. It's like you cannabis tries to show you something, you're like, "I'm not ready." It's like, "Okay, well, let's do this instead." And then it usually comes around to what it wants to show you anyways, but it just feels more gentle, like a more feminine energy or something, where those other psychedelics will just push you and be like, "Good luck."
They just push you off the edge. Yep, into the darkness.
Yeah. Yeah,
Do
and
you
it's like,
guys?
"Okay, I guess I'm here now."
Yeah, right. So do you guys offer edibles or is it strictly because I know Daniel was saying you guys do like vaporizing?
Mhm. Yeah, it's the particular blend is flour, so that's what we use.
Hmm.
It's just this like, the onset with timing and things with edibles just isn't as easy, but, I mean, soon enough, we'll also be working with, psilocybin will be offered with, for people that are want to experience it, and we can offer support for that. So it's there are options for people to get to explore these spaces, and us just to be able to help them with it, which is important.
Hmm. Hmm. So, how important is actually having like a quote unquote mystical experience for healing trauma? Because I've heard different schools of thought on this. Some people say that it's all in the spiritual experience, that mystical feeling
Mhm.
of merging with the all. But then others say that that's not necessarily needed in it. You can have breakthrough therapeutic experiences with lighter doses or not even having that type of experience at all because sometimes it can be rare. So in your experience, does the mystical experience really is it needed?
I don't think so. I feel like how anyone gets meaning from the experience is what's important, and each individual is gonna ascribe their own meaning to the experience no matter what it is. So if it's a very abstract space where all of a sudden, someone's mind is, I don't know, filled with a busy highway, and then the highway's empty, it's like, that's not mystical, but they feel better after. It's like, "Oh, I don't feel as anxious. I don't feel as overwhelmed." So I think healing can look different for everyone. And if but for some individuals, maybe they need to heal that spiritual side of themselves, and that mystical experience is what helps give them new meaning and helps really deepen their experience on this plane of existence. And I feel like it's more about that instead of I never would want to judge anyone's experience and say like, ah, that wasn't healing. It's like if they said it's healing, it's like then it was healing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Um, and as far as dosing, um,
Mhm.
do you guys usually use high dose, microdose, or a mix of the two? So how does that work?
For the ketamine experience, we'd use like a relatively high dose for the experience so that people don't need to come all the time. It's like our protocol would be 2 sessions of a relatively high dose to bring on this psychedelic experience, which allows kind of a disconnect, between the body and mind. So sometimes people describe it as a disassociative, but that's not really accurate because you're very associated with the experience, but you're just disassociated from the body, which means you can then work through thinking patterns and emotional patterns and things like that in a different way. Um, but I mean, I know so many people who microdose with psilocybin and have found it life changing. And same thing, like having microdoses of THC or CBD. I think all of these things have a place, and it just comes down to the individual of what they're looking for and what they really want to work on. I think for really big kind of impactful changes, you need to do big doses of these medicines to have a really big shift quickly, but that can blow out your ego, and you can have full ego death, and that's overwhelming and can be scary. So I think it really depends. Again, like, I just trust the individual. It's like I will recommend what I feel like is best for them, but I also trust that what each person needs is like there's that little intuitive thought. There's something inside that's like, "I don't want a big experience." Like, I'm starting small. It's like, "Let's trust that." Like, let's go with
Mm,
that. Let's just go with what feels safe because it's that feeling of unsafe that then often, connects to all the trauma that we've experienced in some way or another. And the psychedelic spaces have been misused by a lot of people over the years. And clients are in their most vulnerable places. And sometimes that just gets taken advantage of. So I'm all for making sure that the client feels as safe as possible. And I'm just there to support them on this wild ride.
yeah, you bring up the concept of psychedelic abuse within therapeutic
Mm.
settings, and you're seeing a little more of that as these things start to become more prominent in our society. Have you ever seen anyone or had a client that has um, maybe some trauma or some PTSD from a prior experience where they've been abused within a therapeutic session?
I've definitely heard of it. It happens, and because this is still often on the fringes, so there's no governing body. There's no like you have to just trust that everyone is being ethical, and sometimes they're not getting the training that they were supposed to get. Like I've been working as a therapist for over 10 years now. Boundaries were something that were, one of the first things we talked about, one of the first things we learned, and I've really made sure that that's something that I adhere to. And we have these discussions in our prep sessions. Like we discuss, like there will never be any type of sexual contact ever, even if the client says they request it. It's like, no, that will never happen in session. And I'll explain, it's like, I will hold your hand if you're having a hard time and things like that. And then within the session, I will even explain, like, if someone asks for a blanket, it's like, I am now covering you up with the blanket. Or if someone's like physically, like somatically letting things out, and it's like, I'm worried they're gonna hit themselves, like, I will take their arm and I'll help them, like, still move with it, but I was like, "I'm taking your arm and I'm moving you through," it's like, this has to be expressed, but I have heard of experiences where it doesn't even have to be anything intense, but even just someone like a practitioner trying to like make someone feel better in the experience, which isn't what our job is. Our job is to support the client as they're going through difficult experiences, not take it away. The difficult experiences are part of it. So it's not my job to come in and be like, "Oh, let's take that out of your space." It's more like, "I'm here with you in this really, really difficult place. You're not alone. And I'm sorry it's so hard." It's like and that's sometimes all we could do, but I've heard of, like, physical boundaries being broken and yeah, unfortunately, these things happen, and it's why training and personal inner work as well is always really important to kind of be able to examine, like, what boundaries would I feel comfortable with, and how do I express that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the somatic aspect of it because that was going to be my next question. Um, like touch during
Mhm.
a psychedelic session, it really is, no pun intended, a touchy issue. Um,
Mm.
were you in your training? Were they did they focus heavily on like what you can and cannot do, what ethically you should and shouldn't do in terms of touch?
It was definitely a big discussion, and basically, it's like you don't need to touch anyone. It's like after there's a harm of them, like, hurting themselves, because again, like, there can be huge somatic releases, and people can thrash, they can flail, and I have to keep them safe. Like, I don't want them to fall off the bed or the mat, and I don't want them it's also just say they get up to go to the bathroom, it's like we have safety protocols to make sure that we can, like, escort them without them falling. Like, there's just so much that has to happen around that, and all of these discussions, it's about all of this happening before anyone's in the medicine. So it's like there have to be discussions like, if you have to go to the bathroom while you're in the medicine, this is what it's going to look like. This is how we're going to do it. This is, it's like, if I'm worried you're going to hurt yourself, I'm going to help you with movement and I'm not going to stop it, but I'm not going to let you hurt yourself. It's like, I will hold your hand if you ask me to, but all of these have to be agreed upon in a sober state. It can't be anything that comes up within it and all of a sudden, it's there can be things that can be discussed, of course, but most of this has to be discussed in the sober space because when someone's under the medicine, it's like we could say lots of things and want lots of things, and then we come out of it, it's like, "Ooh, why did I say that and why did they do that?"
Yeah, yeah. Now, for a substance like cannabis, there's not much of a protocol in terms of danger. Generally, cannabis is a very safe substance. Ketamine can
Mhm,
be a little different, but for drugs like LSD, DMT, psilocybin, some of those tryptamine psychedelics,
mhm.
are there dangers for people in taking them?
I mean, 100%. I mean, I feel like there's dangers for again, like cannabis as a substance, you're not gonna overdose. You're not go but if you take it on your own, you get up too fast, you faint, you hit your head. Like, again, like, all of these things can
Hmm.
have their dangers with them. And right now, like, our team is making sure that we're on top of all of the research with as much research, at least, as we can with psilocybin to really know how can we support clients coming in? What can we tell them about any medications are on. Like there's already been research with SSRIs and psilocybin and that those don't work well together. And so there's just different aspects of this, but because of the war on drugs and so much of this research was stopped for so long, um, like it really is this kind of this trailblazing space of really working with what is safe. And I'm so grateful that there is all this research that's happening to really examine what is safe, how much, what is the dosaging. But most psychedelics in general are quite safe. It's just about what happens when we're in the medicine that can be a danger. Like there's rarely like, you take too many mushrooms. It's like you're going to have maybe a bad trip and you're going to be there for a long time, but you're not it's not gonna hurt your body, it's more about what's gonna happen when you're in the medicine, and so that's why with all of these, having just a safe space or safe people around, is really just so, so important, and the contraindicators, I don't have enough of, like, a medical background to know exactly what medicines don't work well with other psychedelics, but I'm leaving that up to all the wonderful doctors and researchers who are now able to do this work, which I'm so grateful is able to continue to happen now.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard a lot of research with SSRIs and certain substances, and usually the contraindications in terms of SSRIs are not dangerous per se in terms of toxicity, but a lot of times I hear that they'll sort of cancel out the trip. And I hear of people taking benzodiazepines to cancel out their trips as well if they're having a rough experience. Now, what I
Mhm.
tell people generally is I don't think that's a great idea because, in my view, I think that these psychedelic experiences need to sort of conclude themselves in a way to wrap. They have the power to wrap themselves in a nice little bow. And even if you're
Mm.
in the experience very deep and you think you're having like a really really terrible experience and it's really difficult for you, I feel like aborting a trip is not necessarily the right move. Um, have you ever had a situation where you've seen someone that you thought needed to or should abort a trip, or do you feel the same way?
No, I've felt the same way. I've been there with people when they're having a really, really, really scary experience. And I've just been like, "I'm here with you. I hear you. I understand." It's like to even it's just like, "Tell me what's scary about it. What are you seeing? What are you noticing?" And it's like not trying to again, we don't want to turn away from it because I agree. It's like it has to be a break glass in case of emergency that it's like, "Okay, we gotta get them, we gotta get them out of this space." But often it's just meeting someone in the darkness because usually it's and sometimes it's also about remembering, what feels scary about this, and allowing ourselves to try to examine that. But when we're overwhelmed, we're in fight or flight, that stuff kinda goes out the window. But yeah, I'd agree, it's trying to just be with the difficult situations, and again, it's why psychedelics are for everyone because that's really scary and overwhelming, and you have to be willing to be in those dark spaces.
Yeah, for sure. Would you mind, and I can cut this out if you don't want to talk about this, but would you mind describing some of your like profound psychedelic experiences, like what
Yeah.
substances that you've experienced, and just sort of take me through some of the more profound ones?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind speaking to that. I feel like in the past I would have been like, "Ooh, I don't know if I could talk about that," but I feel like this is the world that I am inhabiting, and I feel so in my purpose working with people in these spaces. And I feel like letting these powerful, profound experiences be shared and talked about is important because it can help other people be like, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go. Um, so I guess it's like I had like a psilocybin experience when I was younger with a very good friend of mine. Um, and it was probably the first time I experienced total clarity of mind. It's like I had been going through grief for years and definitely was in a state of overwhelm, which I was not connected to at all, just trying to like get done my degree and just focused on that. Um, and had done psilocybin, like, I didn't do, like, the internal, like, eye mask, that was unknown to me, but it was more like we were just very together in the experience, and I remember at one point, I did kind of lay down and close my eyes, and I could see the inside of my mind, and it was like do you remember the old Windows desktop with, like, the green hills and the blue sky, and there was, like,
Yeah.
nothing else on it? It's like, that was my brain, and I was just like, "Oh, that's" I was like, "This is, like, the most clear and the most peaceful," and I could see, like, this tiny, tiny little, like, I don't know, like a dresser or like a file folder, something like that. It was like a and I just thought I was like, every single answer to the universe is right in there. If anyone were to ask me anything, I was like, I would just open this up and I'd be like, here you go, here it is. And it's like that clarity of mind I felt like stayed with me for a little while after. It's like I just felt much more calm and much more at ease and much more relaxed. And that was kind of even without knowing it, it definitely had settled something in me like, "These are healing." Like, something about this experience was very healing, and it's illegal, and I wasn't supposed to do it, and, like, not that I'm, like, wrong for doing it, but, like, I knew there was very few people I could share that experience with, even though I found it quite profound and quite, impactful. Um, and for others, it's been, like, really the last few years I've been working with a psychedelic cannabis blend, and I have found it so healing. The one of my first experiences, I had something where I had never understood, like, how chakras, the colors like, when I'd see a poster of, like, like, someone meditating, you'd see the chakras and colors, like, I don't understand where that comes from. I don't know why the colors are like that. It's like, I couldn't really connect to that space, and I did one of these, psychedelic cannabis ceremonies, and I could see my heart chakra, and at one of the meditation prompts, I literally felt like I'd been kicked almost in the heart chakra, and grief that I had been holding on to for most of my life was released. And it's like things that even talk therapy had not got to for years and years and years. And I described it, it was things that had been calcified, like to my being, to my spirit, to my soul, to my body. They'd just been stuck there. And I was able, like, it literally felt like a kick or a punch. And I just cried and cried and cried. And I was able to move this grief that nothing else was able to touch, and it was overwhelming, but not scary, like, it felt very healing. I was like, "Oh, this has been here and has been stuck to me for so long, and I didn't know this like, it would be this easy." And not that it was easy, but it's just that it was like I imbibed cannabis, and I did this meditation, and I was there. I was healing myself very, very quickly, and so I found that just that then kind of put me on this path, like, very, very determined, because I was like, I literally, I think I finished the session, I was like, "This changes everything. This is a substance that's very accessible." Um, and in one session, I felt incredibly healed and at ease. And so since then, I've had equally as profound experiences, kind of with cannabis in that way, which has been remarkable.
Have you ever had like a bad trip, quote unquote, or I like to say challenging?
Yeah. I The first time, one of the early times I did psilocybin, I was with a college boyfriend, and he got bit by a dog,
Oh my
which
god.
was very upsetting, and his cut looked green, and it was just, like, very like, we were at someone else's house, and again, not a safe space, not a safe setting. Had to go to someone else's house, and the house we went to, luckily, she was a nurse, and she was able to, like, fix it. He didn't need stitches, but it was like then the experience could kind of change. And then I was in Amsterdam, and I was on a trip in Amsterdam, and it just was like I felt like this kind of darkness, like, kind of settled, and um I couldn't settle myself. And it was like Amsterdam in general can be quite seedy. Like, there's a reason why people often go to Amsterdam. And I've been there a few times, and I've really enjoyed it, but this one, it was just like it just didn't feel great. And I did find that, like, I kept trying to come back to self and center in self, and I'd have that fear of, like, I'm gonna be like this forever. This is how I feel now. It's never gonna stop. And, like, trying to be rational in that space. I didn't have the skills I have now, and I didn't have someone with me who, like, the person who was with me was also feeling the same. And so it's
Mm.
like I think we are also just feeding on each other's energy. And in the end, to, like, break it, we went to the cinema and watched, like, a really stupid movie, and that was the thing that, like, it was just this giant big distraction, instead of, again, with my training now, if that came up, be like, "Okay, I need to sit with this feeling. This means something." And I was not prepared, and I didn't have the internal dialogue of just like, "What does this mean, and what do I need to look at?" It was more like, "Get me out of here." And so I can understand when that happens to clients as well. It's like, "This is scary, this is overwhelming." It's like, "I hear you. I know. It is, and we're gonna keep going." Like, it's kind of it's tricky because in life, I feel like something like that happens, and we're usually like, "I'm out. I'm going the other way. Like, get me out of here." And these experiences, there's just often not an exit ramp either. It's just you gotta ride it out.
Yeah, it's a skill you have to acquire to be able to surrender to essentially your mind convincing you that you're dying in that moment, and that is so difficult. That feeling of you're going to be crazy for the rest of your life, and this is what it's going to be forever. And to me,
Yeah.
one of the first times I experienced that, it made me think that it pissed me off, to be honest, because
Mm,
what it was for me was like my society has let me down in such a way that it told me that these substances were dangerous, toxic, I'm poisoning myself, they're going to drive me insane. And that's like I had the realization that there was part of me that was uh like looking back on that to inform what I
mm,
was going through, and it was just very, very frustrating. But I've had experiences where one time, it was actually the last time I took 5 grams. It was a long time ago. I haven't touched
mm.
5 grams since
That's
because
a
that was
lot.
usually
That's a big
yeah.
experience.
That was, like, usually that was, like, my go-to at the time. I would once in a while, me and my friend and my fiancée would get together, and we would do 5 grams because that was, like, that benchmark Terence McKenna, dose.
Mm.
And the last time I did it, we had a very long conversation. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock when we measured them out, and they were just sitting on the table, and we were discussing some really, really deep psychological traumatic
Mm.
issues with all of us. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we felt amazing because we had just gone through this like cathartic experience of like, talking about our traumas and this and that. And what I didn't realize was that that was the psychedelic trip right there. Like we already had
Mhm.
it. So at
Yeah.
3 in the morning, we decided that we were going to ingest all of these mushrooms. And this was
Oh,
again, this
Josh.
was yeah, it was so terrible. This was years ago. And I fully blame myself and take responsibility because like I should have never let this happen. But I was a lot less informed than I am now. And
Mm.
I was absolutely brutalized. All 3 of us were just brutalized. I felt this feeling of all of the sorrow and sadness of the entire universe
Mm.
just, like, inside my body, and it was horrible, and I kept telling myself, like, "This is so" like, you know what you're doing, like, you know that this experience happens, like, you understand that when you have this type of experience, you have to surrender to it, and when I
Mm.
surrendered to it, it just got worse because of the preparation and how late it was. So for everyone out there, I
Yeah.
recommend have a good night's sleep, do not be tired, and
Mhm.
do not take them at 3 o'clock in the morning, please.
No, especially because then, like, it went like, what time did it end the next day?
It was I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know. I
Yeah.
mean, we
Like,
were
that's a
just
couple days gone, like, that's a lot.
yeah, it was horrible. And what made it
Mm.
worse was I came up to my apartment and we had left our dog up here. And I came up and there was shit all over the floor, and it made it worse because we were still in that
Oh,
experience, and you're just seeing your life in shambles or what it
yeah.
feels like
It's
is in
like there's
shambles around
literally
you.
shit everywhere.
Exactly, exactly. It was
Internally,
just difficult.
externally, everything's a
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah. I mean, since then
Yeah.
I've had quite a few experiences. Usually 4 grams is the dose I go for now. It's a little less intense. I've had so many beautiful experiences since then. And
Mm.
honestly, I think I learned the most from that experience, and it gave me this sense
Mm.
of respect for the substance that I couldn't have had without it showing me how intense and how dark it can get.
Yeah. Well, and is psilocybin your medicine of choice?
It is, yeah, and I
Mm.
like DMT a lot as well, but there's just a very special place in my heart for psilocybin. I love it
Mm.
so much.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm so grateful that that a lot of these natural medicines are becoming legalized because they can be so healing and they can be so powerful, even when it's like this bad trip, because it's just showing us these parts of ourselves that we usually try to hide from ourselves. And it's like we kind of know it's there, but it's like, I don't want to. And then it comes up in the trip. But I always use the example of like, often, even when I was younger and often lots of people, it's like, they have whatever substance it is, and they're like, "I wanna get effed up," and it's like, that's their intention, and then they're
Mhm.
shocked when they have, like, a really effed up time. So it's one of those where it's like, "Well, that was literally your intention. That was what you had decided you wanted to have happen, and then it happened." And I remember, like, in university hearing about so many people, it's like, "Oh, I can't use that. I have a bad trip. I can't do that. I have a bad trip." And instead of looking at their own experience, it was like, "Well, it's this substance is the problem. It's not my own experience, my internal experience," or things like that. So it's even because I used to then have that fear of like, "Well, I don't wanna use that because that sounds scary and terrible," and then I'd have a great experience. It's like, "Oh, okay. It's obviously person to person," and I feel like that understanding now is also it's like I mean, as a, like, therapist guide, like, I can help support people because I have a few sessions with them before we're in the medicine, before they're actually taking anything. So, they usually come to me with, like, "This is what I wanna work on. This is my past experience. This is what might come up." And so it's just being able to dialogue with them like, "Okay, and if this comes up, how do you want me to support you?" Or, "What do you want?" It's like things like that that can really help where when we do this solo or like that. If you've been able to work through so much of an experience, it's like, okay, well, maybe let's integrate that huge conversation we have and then take the medicine.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And identifying when is the right time to put it off because there's no rush.
Yeah.
There's no
No.
rush.
Yeah, these things have been around since before us and they'll be here when we're gone.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will. And hopefully they will be here in a higher capacity as the years go by and the years go by.
Yeah.
So have you seen the legality, at least in Colorado? It seems like they're moving in the right direction. Have you seen other
Mhm.
places moving in the right direction, like Oregon?
I've noticed Oregon. I've also noticed in Canada, I believe Alberta has just legalized psilocybin, as well. I think BC is going that way. Canada in general seems to be slowly moving in that direction. In the States, I would just be hoping more so that insurance companies would start covering this type of treatment. I feel like the legality is one piece, but psychedelics are already legal. There's so like we have them that are already legal, and it's about making them much more accessible. And the problem is that they're just not. And so I am all for more of these things becoming legal, but no matter what, people are going to use them. I'm going to like, they can. It's more, I feel like I would love for these things to become more accessible to everyone so that they have the opportunity to use these things because it's just not always something that everyone can afford. And the costs are the cost because it takes a team of people, it takes years of training, all these other things to kind of make it, if you want to work with certain, centers or guides. And I feel like if we could get insurance to cover even ketamine treatments, it's like that's something that's been proven to work for anxiety and depression. It's not everyone's substance, and that's fine. But for those that want it, I just hear so often it's like, "Oh, I wish I could, but their ketamine clinics are expensive." And so I'm hoping that I would love to see accessibility become also more at the forefront as well as legality. Like if we could have both, wonderful. Like, let's get that going. But I think it's like, why don't we just also make what we have readily available accessible to people who really need it?
And something else I'd like to see is funding going into like places that you wouldn't normally expect, but are very, very important. Like to me, if you're going to have like a psilocybin session, I
Mhm.
feel like when you come out of that, it's going to be very important to your process of integration if your support system is also trained in a way where they can support you as opposed to look at some of the things that you might be saying or doing and saying, "Oh, you've
Mm.
gone crazy," and all that. So I feel like there should be some money put into training and integrating the support
Mhm.
system of the client as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think there needs to be an entire system set up for this and maybe give it a few years, and there will be because there is a market for this. There is research going into this. Like MAPS has been doing this work for ages, and they found they can pretty much cure PTSD in, I believe, 6 sessions with MDMA, which is, again, remarkable. Like that's absolutely phenomenal. But it's like, will insurance companies cover that type of treatment? Because there's so many. I know so many. We've worked with clients who had been turned away from being able to be part of that trial, and they felt like they really needed it. And so it's like if these things are not made more accessible for people, it's like there is a mental health crisis. Like we can't deny it. And it's not a new thing. It's just people are talking about it now. Like it's always been an issue. I feel like COVID did bring a lot of it to the forefront for people because they were locked in their houses and a lot of people turned to whatever they could to cope and realize like, "Ooh, maybe I don't have great coping mechanisms." And so now it's like people that are able to speak about their emotions and, we're from a generation of people that have been taught like it's also okay to talk about our emotions and talk about our experiences. So I don't think this mental health crisis is a new thing. I just feel like it's actually becoming much more prevalent because people are talking about it and we need support for it. We need accessibility for whatever works, because not everyone can handle antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds. There can be lots of side effects with them. It's like if we could make these different substances easier for people to yeah, to experience, to integrate from, like all of that would be so helpful.
And another part of accessibility, I think, that may become a problem is like some of these large companies who are trying to patent distribution methods and things like that, like Compass
Mhm.
Pathways. So, I mean, the way I see it going, at least in my like, ideal world, is
Mm.
when people start to really see, like, in a viral way how effective these substances are, then they're not gonna
Mhm.
need to go and pay MAPS $3,000 to have an MDMA session, or, pay Compass however much they're gonna charge for their psilocybin sessions. They can just go get it themselves, or they can, even
Mhm.
easier, they can grow it. The same way
Yeah.
that when cannabis became legal in particular states, you see that they're allowing people to grow, and I think that's what's going to happen, in my opinion. That's what I see the future as. But I could definitely see an issue, with a lot of these companies trying to patent certain things.
Yeah. And the difficulty is just making it so that I mean, they can patent whatever they want, but it's, we even like look at the cost of insulin. Like it's free in Canada and it's,
Hmm.
so expensive here. So there's just people are going to we live in a consumer driven society, so they're going to be consumers. So it's also about figuring out how to make these things, how to offer them. Like in the next couple months, I'm going to be doing like group ketamine experiences to try to make it more accessible for people, so that they don't have to pay like the one-on-one cost. It would be like so you also get then a sense of community because like these experiences, doing them together, it's like whoa, we just went to space and back as a group. It's like things like that can be really powerful. So we're trying to do whatever we can to also help with the accessibility because, we want to be part of the solution as much as possible. But it's like having doctors and, insurance and liability, all these other things. It's like it's a bummer because all of these things end up costing money. Like I would love to just run a retreat center where everyone just comes for free, donates whatever, donate time, money. It's like have a barter system or something. And maybe one day I'll be able to do that. Um, but yeah, it's a real I just wish these things could be experienced. Like if everyone on the planet could have like one profound psychedelic experience, we'd be living in a very different world. It would just be a completely different space. So it would just be nice if that was an option for anyone and everyone.
Yeah, I heard Graham Hancock. He had a quote where, and he says it all the time. He says a prerequisite for whether or not you can run for president of the United States should be you should have 12 ayahuasca ceremonies first, and that
That's a
I'm on
lot.
board with that. Yeah, it's a lot, but I'm on board with that. If you're gonna run the world or run the free
Yeah,
world, get in there and do that
yeah.
work.
I mean, I feel like that would be good for most. It's the same, like, it's really interesting because as a parent, I feel like that's a psychedelic experience in itself. Like, to all of a sudden have to like raise the most complex being on the planet, and try to do it
Hmm.
without being too traumatizing. And it's like that in itself can be a psychedelic experience. But I feel like thanks to my work with psychedelics, like I'm a better parent, I'm more patient, I'm more present. It's like because all the baggage, it's like that I brought with my from my own childhood, it's like I've been able to work through in very interesting and new ways. And I think it's something that before I was a parent, like no one told me, it's like you'll probably get emotionally triggered by your child because you'll also see yourself at certain ages. Where it's like you'll see them be like, I remember that age. It's like, oof, that's what happened to me at that age, or that was my experience at that age. Um, and so it's interesting because I feel like I really do believe psychedelics can be healing in so many different ways and so many different facets of life. So yeah, I'd be all for. I mean, 12 is a lot, but I think to be president, that's fair enough. I think even just to be a person, we should have to have a couple different, big life changing, profound experiences.
Yeah, it seems that rites of passage are like a thing of the past in our culture. They don't really exist anymore.
Mm.
Um, but Angela, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. I just have one more question as we wrap up. And so, how has seeing the healing potential of psychedelics and seeing all these clients that you've seen heal in profound
Mm.
ways, how has that changed you as a person and the way that you look at the world?
Mm. Oh, I love that question. Um, Um, I mean, I feel like I have always believed in the healing power of the individual. Like, if they've come to see me just even as a therapist, there's something in them that wants to change, that wants to be different, that wants to move forward. Um, and I feel like what's always astounded me and like been really powerful for me is watching people who have been through just the most traumatic, overwhelming, horrific life experiences, and how at the end of the day, they are still kind, generous, wonderful people who are still trying their best and who are, like, trying to give themselves to those around them. And so I found that I just find that, um, it makes me wanna be better because, I just see people who have been through so much and they wanna be better, and it's like, "Me too. I wanna heal. I wanna heal for me, I wanna heal for them, I wanna heal for the planet because I feel like the ripple effects of that is always remarkable because someone starts to heal themselves, then they're in their circle, they're like, "What's different? What did you do?" Then they'll share, and, like, the next person's like, "Me too." It's like, "That's different. What did you do?" And it's like, it just kind of it's like, I feel like it's the only way, like, healing each individual person is the only way we'll be able to change the whole world. So I feel like watching these people and all the people I work with heal just makes me wanna heal and makes me wanna be, the best version of myself so that I can help other people wanna be the best version of their selves. It's genuinely an absolute honor to get to do the work that I do, to be with people, um, in their most powerful moments, like, in their most sometimes vulnerable spaces. It's an absolute honor to get to be there with them, and I feel just so grateful that that's what I get to do in my everyday life. It's wild.
If people want to find you, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram at Altered Healing, or you can find me at Medicinal Mindfulness, and I'm a therapist and guide there. Yeah, happy to chat. We do intake calls that are free. If anyone wants to chat, even just to see, like, are psychedelics right for me? Are these ones right for me? I also just like to talk. So if you just want to chat to see, how we can help or how we can work together, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Angela, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Josh. It was lovely.